Kaimere is a distant planet. It is defined by waves of life brought from Earth and set free to evolve independently in this new context. The indigenous life of the planet, swarms of microbes called magic by the people who live there, are what harvest Earth organisms and make copies on Kaimere. As the asteroid which concluded the Mesozoic never struck Kaimere, dinosaurs remain the dominant terrestrial megafauna. Legends of the Walking Dead are found throughout the world. Most of these stories on Earth are founded only in the human imagination, and our reasonable fear and aversion to the dead. Sometimes a witch's magic might not be ready to die when the body perishes, and keeps their host moving for a little bit longer. In other cases, a witch might use their magic to animate a corpse, not only having its body act as a magic battery similar to artifacts and familiars, but also making for a formidable guardian. There are very few witches with such power on Earth anymore. In Kaimere, the living dead are much more common. While there are many theories as to why this is, and indeed not all have the same origin, a consensus comes down to the simple fact that, like witches, Kaimerans are host to magic, and sometimes that magic isn't ready to let go. It is a common practice among most Kaimeran cultures to burn the dead. Some anthropologists have argued this is to deny scavengers a lure towards settlements, and while this may well influence the practice, the reality is that sometimes a Kaimeran's magic isn't ready to die, and is also undoubtedly influential. This isn't common, and a vast majority of hereditary magic dies with the host, but it has been documented enough times to be reliably understood. The magic needs a host, and it is bound to their host, so eventually these deteriorating corpses fall apart and the magic dies. But it can take a few weeks to even years in extreme cases for the magic to finally wither away. The condition of these undead range from stalling the rot such that they could be mistaken for a lethargic living, all the way to animated skeletons. In extreme cases, magic might live without a body, continuing to live on as a specter, though without a body to consume for energy, these ghosts rarely last for long. In a few instances that will take a new body and warp it to resemble their old form, but this is most often the magic can't handle the new host's own hereditary magic, which usually fights back and kills the possessing spirit, but, even so, touching the dead is often taboo, as it can invite such possessions. Most Kaimeran languages have their own word for the walking dead, but the assembly refers to them all generally as Wealcanlichs. While all of these have inspired all sorts of legends, from revenants with unfinished business and desecrated possessions, to perseverant warriors fighting beyond the grave and divine ascension, the reality is simply a parasite refusing to surrender the host. As a general rule, Wealcanlichs aren't particularly dangerous, as they lack intelligence. They tend to go about activities like eating and sleeping that a body needs to recover, presumably so that their body can recuperate, even if its core systems have deteriorated. If they are impeded, they tend to move around an obstacle rather than fight. Burning will destroy a Wealcanlich and its reanimation magic, hence the common practice shortly after death is to prevent Wealcanlichs from even taking hold in the first place. While it is said to be a very common practice during the Age of Witches, especially amongst cultures like the Picardian and Telmid that generally do not burn their dead, it is extremely rare to hear of a Wealcanlich in modern times. Some historians think that this is due to there being far more animated corpses in the Age of Witches, mistaken for Wealcanlichs, and others consider the higher frequency coming down to exaggerated accounts of less reliable ancient historians. But it has also been proposed that the hereditary magic was more potent during this era of Kaimeran history. This theory is supported by bone and tissue studies of commoners at the time being substantially higher in magic concentration than modern Kaimerans. There also appears to have lived substantially longer during the Age of Witches. It was common to see accounts and osteological confirmation of people regularly living over 1,000 years, whereas modern Kaimerans tend to begin aging rapidly between 5 and 700. As one might expect, this is not a popular theory, but it does seem to be consistent with older average lifespans of Kaimerans during the Age of Witches. Hereditary magic has extremely high caloric demands, and the reality might be as simple as having less potent magic being more efficient, and therefore it would be naturally selected for as generations go by. Although conventional Wealcanlichs are benign during the Age of Witches, powerful necromancers found it very easy to more or less hack into the hereditary magic, bolster it, and make it a walking dead to serve them. An unenchanted corpse could still be raised and walked about as a puppet, but directing the hereditary magic was substantially easier. Sufficiently powerful witches could have an elite guard or even armies of the walking dead, adding to a horde as they slaughtered their way across enemy territory. While this is seen as a quintessential horror back during the Age of Witches, when many witch lords held such power, there have been witches in modern ages who have done the same. In the conquest of the Siritic wetlands and subjugation of the Kentarium Islands by Empire and Republic respectively, powerful witches of the Defenders raised army of their fallen kin and led unexpected and brutally successful retaliations against the invaders. Necromancy is strictly outlawed in the nations of the known world, so witches with this ability are supposedly extinct, but there are rumors of powerful puppeteers on the fringes of the known world. Hezuki, a wild magic demon from Kaishel, was the most recent maker of a Wealcanlich horde, which she used to consume the inhabitants of numerous islands in the eastern reaches of the Kaleen Sea during the events of Reaper's Choice, 5th novella in Songs of the Inland Sea. In the interest of not spoiling the story, I will leave it at that. Just as a Kaimeran's hereditary magic can keep a corpse moving, so too can the magic of a witch. Sometimes the witch keeps their body moving as a revenant or lich, while other times a witch will live without a body as a ghost. Witch magic is bound to their host, but can be more readily capable of surviving on their own due to greater power, so there are far more instances of witch ghosts than those of ghosts made of Kaimeran magic. They can also happen to earth witches, and accounts of many ghost stories and reports throughout our own history can be directed back to this. Like Kaimeran magic, witch magic will sometimes warp a new host to resemble their old body, but these facsimiles aren't truly their old body, and a person's immune system is often able to fight off all but the most powerful of ghosts. Witches can also keep their bodies long after death, sometimes doing so for centuries. A revenant of this nature will be encountered in my next anthology. The Ushalek regularly uses its magic and control over local flora to take over a body and function of a corpse. These entities are more of a framework for mobile plants than undead, but they still fall under this classification by the Assembly. There are numerous witches who entered the forest back during the Age of Witches, hoping to harness the magic of the forest, either as a warlock trading service for power, or even trying to control the woods. In their hubris, they were easily overpowered by the might of an ancient god. Now they are among the Ushalek's elite guardians, their magic and bodies dominated and forced to be a voice for the forest god even now, 6,000 years later. There are other lesser understood elder gods beyond the known world. Witches seeking power, scholars hoping to study, and hapless wanderers have all been claimed, and their corpses used for various purposes, such as gathering information, collecting bodies to sacrifice as nutrients, or guardians and voices, much like the Ushalek. Perhaps the most famous of the living dead is the vampire. There are many strains. Some are thralls of homunculi, while others appear to have been made as they were initially created. It is the consensus within the Assembly that vampires were made by the first children as more sophisticated soldier drone Class 3 homunculi, or even as incubators for more powerful homunculi should they be slain. But there have been a few strains which appear to be wild magic, so it's entirely possible that some were domesticated versions of a wild strain. Regardless of their origin, these strains have much in common. All are bodies of people modified by an injected retrovirus which activates with contact with vampire blood. Some in the Assembly argue against their inclusion among the living dead, as they must be made while living to have a functional metabolic system. The virus must kill the host in order to modify, so they are still technically undead even if they are only ever dead for a few minutes. They generally have aspects of a predatory animal to enhance their senses and afford a few natural weapons, and these aspects generally only present themselves when the vampire is prepared to feed. When not feeding, they look as they did at death. Their metabolism can process anything that they would have eaten as a person, though human blood is their most efficient diet. Like most Class 3 homunculi, their metabolism is influenced by heterotherms like the morkertlot. Their skin is extremely dense and hardened by mineralized, near-microscopic denticles, another feature typical of Class 3 homunculi, taken from an unknown creature which some theorize may be from a planet beyond Earth and Kaimere, though it could simply be modified shark skin. Their hide also has photosynthetic properties. Despite the myth claiming sunlight burns a vampire, it actually heals and offers nutritional supplements. Though vampires do not need to sleep, they often fall into a stasis to preserve energy. In this form, their metabolism slows to a point of near death. Active vampires can persist for a few centuries without problem, but those who let their bodies slip into stasis, especially for an entire season, or even years at a time, can find their lives last into the thousands. Coming out of stasis can be a grueling process, as the body is sometimes stiff as the dead, but once they fully revive and have a drink, they are good as new. A vast majority of people only experience lethargy when infected by vampire saliva, which is how vampires are often able to feed. A few are completely immune to its effects and do not make good prey. Some are allergic and die shortly after being bitten. Those allergic or immune cannot be turned into vampires, and of those who are lethargic to its venom, most do not reawaken if the virus is activated by the vampire blood and kills them. Because of this, it is actually fairly difficult and unreliable to make new vampires. Kaimerans are generally immune to the venom of earth vampires, as their hereditary magic is of comparable power, and in their proverbial home court, but Kaimeran strains are more potent to overcome this. In turn, Kaimeran strains outright kill most human hosts, rather than being capable of turning them due to their aggression, so there's minimal overlap between the strains and their respective species. The number of Kaimeran strains is unknown to the Assembly. There were very many during the Age of Demons, but their numbers dwindled in the Age of Witches. The few strains in the Dark Ages seem to have had a lot of success, but the Consolidation era saw many of them exterminated from the known world, and in modern times they are very reclusive. In Picardian folklore, the Tarakopa were vampires who served their master Olekidu, the crocodile demon. Olekidu's vampires had elasmosaur traits like him, with grey hide and long hooked jaws. When the Kozrakai drove Olekidu from Picardia, his vampires were also killed or chased off. While Olekidu has not been seen since, his Tarakopa have been among the Maku invaders who attack the island every few centuries. Vampires are, alongside shifters and witches, the most successful magical beings on Earth. While it was at one time posited that they might have been introduced during the Mercantile Age, The fact that all three are found throughout the world over, and many have substantially adapted within human hosts and local environments, has lent a lot of weight to the idea that these originated back in first children outposts on Earth during their dominion 10,000 years ago. There are many theories as to why these would be made, though vampires were almost certainly a very convenient soldier drone that could reproduce with whatever people were local to the outpost. When the first children fell and their mental subjugation ended, the vampires, witches, shifters, and other experiments on Earth were set free. On Earth, there are dozens of strains which have been identified, however, only 4 are common. Although many animals are incorporated in each of these strains and feeding aspects, they are generally identified by a single predator which makes up a majority of their non-human visual characteristics. Wolf, leopard, hyena, and tiger are the common 4. Less abundant strains are led by mountain lion, jaguar, lion, thylacine, crocodile, bear, smilodon, and numerous rodents and shrews have all been identified either from surviving vampires or preserved specimens. All have heterotherm, leech, vampire bat, shrew, and some other creatures across all strains. Vampires have been modified to have extreme specialized and effective if sensitive digestion. Human blood contains all that they need when in good health, and they can get by on as little as a liter a month. When injured, they often need more, and sometimes crave more of their host than just blood. They can get by on a diet conventional of humans, but the more they eat that isn't human, their digestive system has to work substantially harder to metabolize. They need twice as much non-human meat or blood, and vegetation requires twice as much food as a normal person would need, all while still not providing them with a lot of essential nutrients. As a compromise, many assembly vampires get by on a mix of livestock meat and blood from butchers, and blood from medical surplus. Drinking humans can only be done under heavily regulated circumstances, in no small part to ensure that not too much is being consumed, that the person is fully consenting, and that they aren't allergic or otherwise vulnerable. The Assembly's initiative to keep their people a secret has further resulted in strict regulations on vampire consumption. Like most parasitic magic, the magic of vampires preserves the host as they were at the time of death, and it is very difficult to change. For example, cut hair or lost weight will return to the death form within a few days as long as they are drinking. Vampires do age, especially those further descended from the prime members of their strain, though regular consumption of blood usually returns them near to their death appearance. Because of this, a vampire abstaining from human consumption will age, take scars, and can modify their appearance, but it won't take long for them to revert if they start drinking again. Abstaining will also make their stasis more frequent and more difficult to get out of. Eventually, their need for blood to maintain their youthful appearance increases, and this becomes exponential once they reach a point of deterioration. When this aging happens, depending on a variety of factors, such as strain and individual, eventually the hunger outpaces what they can actually process. They can become insatiable, fall into a hungry madness as the magic doesn't want to let go and move on, twofold if the host also doesn't want to die. There have been a few now extinct strains which quickly deny their host any mental autonomy at all, though this will happen to any vampire of sufficient age, and sometimes to those who abstain for too long. Regardless of origin, this creates mindless predators which can carve through a population. Eventually, the metabolic demands of these killers gets the best of them, and the magic consumes their own body before perishing. Unfortunately, hundreds or even thousands can die if these rabid vampires aren't put down. Destroying a vampire is quite difficult, usually requiring injuries with an enchanted artifact, mauling by a shifter, or powerful witch magic. For those without magic, restraint, dismemberment, and incineration is the only reliable method, and even that can fail. Cutting apart a being with extremely dense muscles and mineralized skin is understandably quite difficult. Having a witch, shifter, or another vampire in the hunting party can make bringing down a problematic vampire much easier, though like skin changers, a vampire's magic protecting their host is extremely powerful, so it's often more difficult than a simple werewolf bite. Far more than witches and shapeshifters, vampires have faced extreme regulations over the centuries since the Assembly increased in power and authority. Making new vampires must be authorized, as must the consumption of humans, living or dead. Violating these regulations is often punished swiftly and fatally. Henry Abernathy is a vampire working for the Assembly we will meet in Cries from Beyond the Known World. In his mortal years, he was a farmhand in Alabama. He enlisted in the Confederate Army during America's Civil War. At 6'4" and big as a door, he was an easy choice for Captain James Donovan, a Confederate officer and lion-strain vampire looking to make a unit of elite soldiers to deal maximum damage to their Yankee opponents. Most didn't survive the transformation, but Henry was among those who successfully turned. Though there was some initial success with this initiative, it did not take long before the Assembly took notice and sent a few slayers to put down these new vampires. Henry, feeling no loyalty to Donovan or the Confederacy as a whole, given that it was comprised of rich slavers usually far from combat, sending poor folk like him to die for their pocketbooks, readily turned on Donovan when he learned about the Assembly and their initiative. With the help of vampire hunter Tristan Baldwin, Henry either captured or killed their way to Donovan. After proving himself to the organization, Henry joined the Assembly and has been a protector of their field agents and scholars ever since, both on Earth and eventually in Kaimere, where he has been stationed since the early 1900s. Cheers to Zachary for sponsoring this episode. The Living Dead is a subject I find fascinating, and while it has been part of Kaimere since the first anthology and earlier drafts of my novels, I don't think I've actually talked about it that much on this channel, so I'm very grateful to Zach for sponsoring this subject. Thanks to my Patreon supporters for making all this possible, and thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe as it helps with the reach and all that. Deeply appreciative for the support y'all give this project. Next week will be an overview of the arthropods in Kaimere, followed by an additional 2 episodes with a focus on ants and trilobites respectively. Until then, thank you so much, and stay fantastic everyone. Have a wonderful Halloween. Cheers, folks!